hang on, I got a message that, okay, I'm being live streamed. Okay, I got it. There we go. Yeah, I'm in Spokane. I'm an hour north of Spokane, Washington.
Great. All right, let's go.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spirit Plant Medicine. My name is Marc Caron, and it's a great privilege for me today to be speaking with Debra Meehl of the Meehl Foundation. And our topic today is about soul retrieval, a shamanic approach for permanent healing. Now, Debra is a plant shaman, and she specializes in entheogenic medicines for soul, deep, whole person healing. This includes soul loss and soul retrieval due to childhood and adult trauma and PTSD. As the president and founder of the Meehl Foundation Spiritual Retreat Center, Debra has been intensively trained in dialectical behavior therapy, we're going to find out what that is, and is a clinical hypnotherapist. In her quest to bridge the gap between clinical and spiritual healing, she also received a Doctorate of Divinity. She's also a combo practitioner and has studied with shamans and traditional teachers from across the globe. In total, she has over 20 years of hands-on clinical and spiritual experience in trenches of trauma and addiction, and has witnessed firsthand the unprecedented and unparalleled ability of soul retrieval and other traditional shamanic practices to heal the heart and the soul of our most pressing personal and social issues. Welcome to the program, Debra. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you so much, Marc, and thank you for having me on.
Well, it's certainly a pleasure, and I know that you were a vendor and an exhibitor at our conference when we finally got able to convene as a community again last November at the conference. And I would just want to thank you for your support for being there and for the work that you do. And while we get into and dive into what we're going to talk about today, maybe you can tell our audience what, about your story. What got you into this line of work? Did something happen? What was that transition for you that brings us here together today to have this conversation?
Sure. So, it started out that I was actually a paramedic for 10 years, and I love that work. I actually taught psychological emergencies and crisis intervention at college level. And what happened was I was always very led spiritually. And what I eventually ended up doing was we went to Texas and we started a group home that was a very Western clinical program for bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. Now, at the same time, I was trained in dialectical behavioral therapy, which is therapy that has an 87% success rate in treating people with mood disorders. And it has a Zen background. So it teaches mindfulness, and it teaches emotional regulation and distress tolerance, all amazing skills. And at about that same time, I also became a clinical hypnotherapist. What happened is that 10 years of that, and I was absolutely burned out because people lived with us for 90 days. That's one of the reasons why the program was so successful, is that we had hands-on access to people all the time and that were in our program. And so I just absolutely, it was a dark night of the soul for me. So I went to Costa Rica and I did 14 days of ayahuasca, and which was extraordinarily intense. I was able to then put together things that had happened to me in my childhood in regards to being able to, step into that spiritual realm in a deeper way. I came out of that experience knowing exactly what I was going to do with the next half of my life. I knew where we were going to be located. I mean, all of the pieces to the puzzle, absolutely fit together. So I got home. I had studied indigenous medicine for years and years and years, along with the Western clinical background that I had. I threw out the program that we had. I looked at my husband and I said, we're going to do weekend spiritual retreats. He was a bit perplexed by that, but he was, he said, okay, whatever you think. And I just said, I know that I'm not called to serve ayahuasca, but I'm absolutely called to serve psilocybin. And we're going to start doing that. And so 6 years ago, in the big state of Texas, which we were still at the time, we started very quietly serving ayahuasca or serving psilocybin to small groups. And 3 years ago, we moved to Washington, and I've done it full time ever since. So that's how I moved into this.
Beautiful. So being in Texas and everything's bigger in Texas, were the mushrooms bigger in Texas?
Yeah.
Sure, I couldn't resist.
No,
I couldn't resist.
They're not bigger, but we're actually much quieter about it there. So yeah, there was a lot in regards to, that transformation leaving there. A month ago, I actually got my church affiliate. We were already a nonprofit 501c3, but for the sake of the United States, you actually need to be a church serving sacrament. And we do that in full ceremony. So it was just one of those legal things that we needed to jump through. And so we did that.
Well, it's certainly an interesting change in, our society, like say, in some areas, you have to still be pretty quiet and things. I know here in Vancouver, British Columbia, and Canada, they're pretty open in terms of what, they're not doing from a prosecution point of view or a legal point of view. And to see how that's changing throughout the United States now as well, with all the initiatives in, Oregon, California, Colorado, just to name a few of the states. How are you finding that, navigating that these days?
Well, for us, again, we realize at this point we're kind of treading a fine line. Seattle is actually legal. Where I'm at, though, not yet, because not all of Washington has made it legal. But here is the thing I think that you would also agree with, is that all of the major hospitals have already researched this. We already know how effective plant medicine is. We already know how effective psilocybin is for PTSD. And quite frankly, we knew that 40 years ago. There were a lot of things that, prevented people from actually getting the healing that we need. So, and I'm not opposed to Western medicine. I believe that Western medicine absolutely has a place. But I also know that after you've tried SSRIs and you've tried tricyclic antidepressants, and you've tried all the stuff for anxiety, and you've been on benzodiazepines until you're hooked and all of that, we as a society need to come together to find a better way. And I really think plant medicine done correctly, with the right intent and the right setting, is absolutely transformational for people, without a doubt. And I've seen that again and again and again.
I completely agree with you. I've always been a believer, even before I got into this work, that nature is our best pharmacy.
Absolutely.
Pharmaceuticals come from nature anyways, when they find out what's working.
Exactly.
And then, it was, I did an interview, one of the first interviews I did many years ago was with a woman by the name of Sherry Strong. And she was talking about sugar, right? How sugar is a drug. And she made it very, very, I love her, the way she described it, because she said, anytime you take something green and make it white, it's a drug.
Exactly.
So when it's a plant, whether it's a coca leaf or cannabis or fungi as a mushroom, well, ayahuasca for that matter. These are plants, and we're not extracting things, right? We're using them, in ayahuasca, for example, we're combining a couple of things, but it's plants. And there's something in my belief system that makes sense when you get all the different attributes of the plants that come together, so you get the spirit of the plant and not just the highly active, whatever they make an ain out of the end, whether it be ibogaine or cocaine or whatever it may be, and then it gets refined. And I agree with you where Western medicine has its place for sure. And I think that we can learn a lot from the past. And that's why I think this work is so profound. And knowing and hearing the stories of transformation where traditional pharmaceuticals haven't worked. They're short term.
One of the things too is that, once you become aware that plants, that there's a consciousness, right? That you are aligning yourself, your vibrational frequency to that particular consciousness and asking for that help to come to you. Again, it's one of those things that in ceremony, then, that's part of what we do is you help people align themselves and understand that there's a consciousness. So the plant, whether it's again, hape that you're using, or again, iboga or ayahuasca, that there's an entity within that, a consciousness that within that actually wants to help you. And that's, again, where I think we've become disconnected as our society.
Well, and I agree with that disconnection, which leads to, when we talk about addiction and the stage that community really has such a high rate of success in terms of not, what's the word I'm looking for? Not going back to the addiction or whatever that is. There's a community component that is really important that I think our society has lost. And yes, there's community and there's things out there, but we're so separated now. And especially over the past few years that's happened, that separation that has got created where we don't necessarily always have the same community support. And I'd love to see even more of that. And I think it's starting to change, and it's part of us and you doing the work that you're doing, because it's when people can have that experience. To me, experience is the best teacher.
Exactly.
We can read and listen all we want, but until you eat that mushroom, you can't describe or pretend to think what that experience is or would be like. I can't tell you what a rose smells like if you haven't smelled a rose. You have to smell the rose. Right.
I am absolutely in agreement.
So let me ask you this. The topic of our conversation today is soul retrieval. When we talk about PTSD and trauma and such, what does that really mean? And we talk about a shamanic approach, and shamanic can be a trigger for some people. Some people are totally open to it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work and how you do that, what medicines you work with, and we just kind of go down that road and we'll unpack it as we go.
So soul retrieval is a concept that is really broad-based with all shamanic culture. So, and basically it is the concept that a piece of us is either hidden or is put off to the side subconsciously, however you want to look at that. For me, I think it's both. I think our subconscious is directly related to what we would call a parallel dimension. So what happens within shamanism is that we believe that spiritually, everything happens within the ether, and we draw that down to us. What happens if we're a child and we give up a piece of ourselves, or if something terrible happens to us in war or in trauma, that a piece of ourselves separates off. So I talk to people that say to me things like, it feels like I have this hole in my chest, that I never feel full inside, that there seems like I can't get into the flow. I can't reach out to the God of my understanding or to my creator. And we began to look at that piece that was separate from ourselves. So if you have to live your life or a piece of your life completely separate from yourself, it's very difficult to then get into that flow. So I say, for example, as a small child, I went to a very conservative church, and I got to, hear from the pulpit, what a terrible wretch I was and what a horrible sinner I was. And I was, if I didn't, do things just right, I was going to go to hell. That caused a separation for me from what we would consider to be a loving, divine creator and God. So I needed to come into terms with that I'd heard that over and over and over. It became a program for me. Other instances of soul loss, again, are you're in an abusive relationship and you give away a piece of yourself to satisfy or please someone else. And obviously that can happen, man or woman, it doesn't matter. Men give away a piece of themselves to try to make wives happy. Wives give away a piece of themselves to make their husbands happy. And sometimes they do that in an abusive relationship. If it happens often enough, then again, a piece of yourself moves into, again, either the subconscious part of your mind, or the shamanic belief is it actually moves into Mother Earth, because that's the only place that's safe for it. What happens in shamanism and what makes shamanism different is that shamanism means that you have a direct revelation. So I work with my spirit guides and my totem animals that come to me in trance work. And I call those missing soul pieces back to that individual. I happen to do it in ceremony when we do entheogens, specifically psilocybin, because that's where my gift lies. It can happen in a variety. You don't have to use entheogens to make that happen. It just happens easier. My belief is, at least, it happens easier when you're doing entheogens. That's the reason that people have miraculous transformation. It's not because I have personally done anything, but what I do is I open what I'm going to call a portal or a vacuum or a toroidal field for that healing energy to come into that individual, and for them to be able to find for themselves that missing piece. And many times they know when they gave it away or how they gave it away, or they feel directly connected to their creator in some way that they didn't experience before. That's what makes ceremony different than doing psilocybin either by yourself or in a clinical setting. It also makes a difference too, because not all psilocybin is the same. So for example, I'm very careful about, I either use Golden Teacher or the infamous penis envy in ceremony, because those two mushrooms provide, so far that I found, the deepest spiritual experience. And that's what people are looking for. If you do one of the others, lots of times you can have anxiety with the ride up into your experience. And that again then makes it very anxious for people that have PTSD. So I try very hard to make the gentleness again of the ride up in regards to, how people can to get to that ultimate experience as easy as possible. Questions?
Well, no, I think it was beautifully said, and I could relate to a lot of it just through my own experience. And it's just when you said that, because I get it. Growing up, I was a pleaser to my parents. I was the one.
Right.
Not so. When you give that up, I gave part of that up, and that was part of my journey as I started doing my work, where I realized that was a big part of it. So and that's just one small facet of my life, what I related to that came to mind. And I love what you're sharing just about that spiritual experience, and from the use of mushrooms. And we hear about that a lot, the mystical experience, the spiritual experience, whatever that may be. And I like to think of them as, almost like a rocket fuel or a tool to awakening, because you can sit in meditation, you can get there, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of discipline, and it's not always something that a Westerner necessarily is going to
Sure.
achieve. I was blessed many years ago with an experience through meditation that was like, it was like completely what the
Right.
yogis described. But to get back there in a meditation, it's kind of fleeting almost.
Right.
But it opened things up. And I know that, and so many people that I talk to, these medicines help open that up, so we kind of get out of our own way and allow the medicine to do the work, right?
Well,
So,
and that picture behind you where it shows me in that integrative picture.
yeah.
So I tell people that you actually have the ability to see that honeycomb network in the air. So some people like to call that a hallucination. And what I say is that I don't think it's a hallucination. What I think is that we're all wired to be able to see that, because we know that certain animals like bees and bumblebees and all of that can see that particular network, but we've been conditioned to not see it. So I think there's been a lot that we've been conditioned to not see. And we've also been conditioned a lot through childhood experiences and adulthood to not be in the flow of the universe, to not be able to co-create with, again, the divine of our understanding. So it's like we're stuck and we don't know how to get unstuck.
Well,
so
I don't want to go off on necessarily a tangent on that, but I believe that there's an global desire for us not to see that, because if we're all free and we're all empowered and we all are in touch with our own divinity in that way, we become very different people in terms of followership, or what some people might call
isn't that wonderful? I mean, I tell people, oh my gosh, when this opens up to you and you can feel and experience that connectedness and that intensity of acceptance and love, you're right. Your life is absolutely changed.
And when you speak of the sacred geometry that's in the image behind me on this side, this side, this side, right there.
There you go.
As you refer to animals and honeybees and things, let's just take a look at history. If we look through ancient archaeology and we look at so many things that have somewhat been repressed, we see the sacred geometry over the millennia through different cultures and time. So there's something there. And I know my first DMT experience was exactly like, I've done enough medicines in my day where, you have hallucinations, you have experiences, but it was the most powerful one where all of a sudden it was just, and I remember my friend who was sitting with me, I was just like, wow, it was so beautiful. All the sacred geometry came in and it was all there. I'd never seen anything like it before in my life, like that, through any of my experiences. Until then I popped into a whole nother world, right? But it was, foundations. And if we take a look at, Tesla's work of 369 and how all these numbers and sacred geometry from the Fibonacci sequence as well, like there's these building blocks of life that if we give them the opportunity and the attention and some focus, it can change our lives profoundly. And I think, and you may be able to, validate or what have you, but it's, these plant teachers change our DNA in such a way and open up things that our average plants don't necessarily do, right?
Exactly. So when you think about soul retrieval as a fail-safe, so what happens is we become separated from our truest essence, the divinity, as you said, of who we are. The truest essence of what we were like as children. That innocence and that love and all of that we had. So when we're separate from that, it then becomes difficult to step into, again, that flow of the universe and to be able to experience those things. So we know from indigenous cultures that, again, being able to see the outline of the auric field of a leaf on a tree. That you don't have to have an entheogen for that if as a small child that was pointed out to you. So it's very interesting to me that, it's like we're making this full circle around in regards to coming back into that nature, coming back into that divinity of ourselves. And actually that's where wholeness is at, as far as I'm concerned, is the way I see it. When your mind, your body, and your spirit are directly linked up, that's when you step into that, what I believe is an amazing life, right? I mean, that's why we're here.
And you nailed that triad of mind, body, spirit.
Yeah.
Anytime we do the work, if you just work on the mind, great, yet not fully effective. You're not getting the trifecta. If you're just working on the body, especially Western yoga, where it's like, did I strike the pose right? It's not about that. It's about doing it and being present, so that, we're addressing and working on spirit as well as our body. And so many people don't acknowledge spirit in that sense. And I think when you get that trifecta going, change can happen very, very quickly. And experience can happen very, very quickly, because you're opening up everything. So of the medicines you work with, we've talked about psilocybin, and I think there's no debate these days of how effective psilocybin is, but you also work with a number of different medicines, of which I have a high respect for, from Kambo, Sananga, Hape. Do you find any particular medicine more effective to create that experience outside of, say, psilocybin? So what we do is that I do a 3-day retreat for the most part, unless you've sat with medicine a lot, and I can have a conversation with you about soul retrieval and explain that sitting in ceremony is so different, because I've worked with people who've said, okay, well, I've done psilocybin for 25 years in my bedroom alone, blah, and I say, well, I'm going to tell you that when you do it in ceremony, it's different, and it's far, I don't want to say stronger, because that's not exactly the word, but it's more connective to do it in ceremony. And I can only surmise about why that is. But so we do a Friday night cacao ceremony. Cacao is an amazing heart opener. It also produces a lot of oxytocin. So there's a community kind of feel when you do cacao together. It's a heart
and I believe,
opener,
again,
sure.
Exactly. And I believe that is the first step. We then do Kambo Saturday morning. Kambo is, I tell people that it's a difficult medicine. It's hard to purge, because again, you're going to purge physically, and you're going to purge emotionally lots of times. And if you don't purge physically, I almost guarantee you're going to purge emotionally. Kambo doesn't have any DMT in it in regards to having a hallucinogenic experience. It does cross the blood-brain barrier instantly. And so when you purge, you are preparing your body and your mind and your spirit for what's going to be the next thing. And that's, for us, is psilocybin. So those two things, I think, make a difference. I tell people that Hape, I don't use Hape all the time, though I think it's incredibly beneficial. Some people need Hape because it helps ground them. I think people that are extraordinarily sensitive to other people's energy, Hape is a wonderful thing for that. I also think that it also helps you focus. I use Hape in ceremony because there are certain Hape blends that lend itself to being invisible to dark forces. And that's the other thing we don't like to talk about, is that when you're doing ceremony, you're opening a portal to hold the light in, and you're holding the darkness out. And that work has been done, again, for thousands of years by shamans. The correct Hape actually makes you invisible to those dark forces. So I use Hape specifically for that. Again, people that are very sensitive to what I'm going to call negative energy use Hape for that same reason. And again, it's a plant ally.
Mhm.
We need to talk about these in regards to plant consciousness. So when you start using Hape, you use Hape, again, holding it with the intention that you become connected to the frequency and the force of that particular plant. That's what that's where we're going. So without, the presentation that I have in regards to soul retrieval, all of that is what I lead people up to being able to do psilocybin, so they understand lower world, where again your totem animals are, your spirit guides are, middle world, where again you can run into dead people, and upper world, which is all about what you would call the angelic forces, or angelic beings that come to you through the light. So once you understand that and you sit in ceremony, when those things appear to you, you're not then afraid. Or at least, let's put it, you're not as afraid lots of times. Because sometimes we get into a ceremony and we see things that feel uncomfortable to us. Usually it's uncomfortable because we don't understand it. So when I tell people, you can look across at your fellow person that's there and they can skeletonize, it doesn't mean that they're going to be dead tomorrow. So move that out of your consciousness. So part of what I do in my retreats is I help people understand what they may be able to see. So again, the experience, they can begin, looking at why that came to them in that particular form.
One thing I just wanted to add to that from my experience, because I think you certainly nailed it about, that anxiety comes up or something comes up that they become resistant.
Yeah.
And, it's that simple quote I love is, what we resist persists. And
Right.
That's why it's so important to surrender to these medicines. We're doing the work, we're putting ourselves into that place and that experience, that if we hang on to it, we're not, you're not going to get near as much of it if you could just open up to it.
Right. So I tell people that usually that happens because, again, our ego is there to protect us. It did a great job when we were a kid, but now as adults, once we have a certain amount of experiences under our belt, your ego, I tell people, has 3 legs. It's like a stool: power and control, security and survival, and esteem and affirmation. And the minute I come up to something that's foreign, that I don't understand, I go into protection mode. That's another reason why I go through what people can see, is because I don't want them to go through protection mode. My people already have PTSD. They're already in fight or flight all the time. And it's like, so there's some fail safes, like, you can raise your hand and go, I've got an issue. Help me here. You never have so much medicine on board that you can't communicate, unless you've taken a God dose. And I've sat with people that wanted to do that.
How much would you consider a God dose?
Anything over 4 grams.
Okay.
So what happens, though, lots of times, at least with psilocybin, with more than 4 or more, is that you almost feel paralyzed. And that can feel overwhelming. And then lots of times what happens is that you'll go back through your past lives. And I know that's a real controversial topic for a lot of people, but I've talked to too many people, and I've also been on that end of the receiving too, where I've got to see past lives, and you get to see your death again and again and again and again. And the reason the medicine takes you there is so that you're no longer afraid. That's the bottom line. But initially, if you're not prepared for that and you don't understand that that can happen, it can feel really scary. So education is what I say.
Absolutely. And then how do you deal with integration after, 3 days of work? Because it's such an important part of any personal growth, any kind of development and transformation, is being able to integrate and incorporate, this newfound, whether it be wisdom or experience or feeling, into your life. What do you,
So lots of times what happens is that people have this transformational experience, And they do one of either two things. Either they go with it, or they try to resist it. So they get home and they talk to somebody, mom, dad, the husband, whatever the case may be. And there's some resistance because those people didn't sit in ceremony. So they don't know what you experienced. And that person comes back amazingly changed. So integration lots of times isn't just about them personally, but it's also about their family. And so what I tell people is that you can always call me. So I had a gal that went through and had an amazing experience, connected to the God of her understanding, that actually talked to her, and a bunch of download come to her and information. And I said, oh, good. And a month later, she had sold her house. She'd gotten rid of her boyfriend.
Wow.
She had done a bunch of things. Sometimes that's how transformation then looks. And then the question is that do you have the skills then to move through that amazing amount of change? And a lot of people do. I think lots of times we don't give people enough credit in regards to how they're going to integrate their new soul pieces and who they are. I've had a lot of, I've had a certain amount of, LGBTQ community come to me. You integrate that soul piece back and you go back home. And lots of times there's major shifts that happen where you're in a job that is wrong for you, that you feel like your soul has been sucked out at the end of 8 hours. I mean, what are you going to do? And a lot of people make dramatic changes. Again, they usually call me 30 days later or 3 months later and say, this is how I changed and this is what happened for me. I had one woman that had been in the military, was actually hooked on benzodiazepines, came to me, we did Cambo, and 6 months later, she became a Cambo practitioner. She said, this was the thing that changed it for me. I just think that integration always looks like understanding where that person was at, where they are now, and what kind of steps that they're going to take going forward to integrate that newness.
Nice. And I think what do you feel about community? Because when you talk about families and going back to your family and friends and maybe sharing your experience, sometimes it's not so well received. And I know within our community, we see that a lot, where people are just grateful that they can be around people, that they could have these conversations openly, without kind of being judged, or, where they can actually talk about it. Where it's difficult to talk about something that people just don't get because they think, a mushroom is just drugs and it's all bad. Right.
Right. I think that, first of all, I think as more and more hospitals and institutions begin incorporating this, there's going to be a huge difference. Second of all, I think that most of us are, when we have people in our lives that make huge changes, it's like coming out of a drug and alcohol treatment program. Are you a different person? How long is it going to last? I think a lot of people are kind of wait and see. And you're right. The problem is that what happens is that people go home and they're excited and they want to share it with somebody. And the first person they share it with goes, yeah, okay, whatever, we'll see if you're really changed or not. And again, lots of times it takes 1 or 2 ceremonies. Sometimes it just takes 1. Sometimes it just takes that big God dose and people are done. I never know exactly how that's going to work, but I just know that 99% of the time people walk away and they are transformed.
Beautifully said. Now, I remember Jamie Wheel spoke back in 2019, and he did part of his presentation was about who should do psychedelics, how often they should, and he had a nice chart and everything, because they're not for everybody. Some people do it once and that's it. Some people do it more, and it, because one of the trends that we see is, ceremonies almost becoming, in some cases, replacing the party scene or the weekend bar scene where we go sit in ceremony for the night versus go out and do maybe what we used to do.
Sure.
So, there's a respect and a reverence for the medicine to do the work, and it's not for everybody to necessarily do all the time. So I guess the question comes down to, who is this medicine and this work for? Is it just for people with PTSD, depression, anxiety, things of that nature? Or, how does that apply to everyone?
So it's kind of like your analogy about sugar earlier. You can be addicted to anything per se. You may not be able to be chemically or physically addicted, but you can certainly be psychologically addicted. And so the interesting thing about ceremony is it's different. You're not doing this and going to a rave. This isn't, I'm going to stand outside with my friends outside the porch and, we're going to drop some mushrooms and drink a few beers and have a good time. The work that, again, and that's what separates ceremony, I think, from what it is that you're referring to, is that it's kind of like people ask me, well, how many times can I do hape during the day? And I said, well, at some point it's going to look crazy to do it like this. So, if you're doing it, 10, 15 times a day, you're just trading cigarettes, or you're trading for whatever to do this. So again, life skills, I think, come in. I think the other thing is that we as practitioners of this medicine, if somebody came to me 4 or 5 times, I'd be saying, okay, now what is it that you're doing that requires this for you to now do psilocybin again? What are we missing? So, and I tell people that call me, psilocybin isn't right for everyone. Maybe bufo is right for you instead. Maybe iboga. If you're addicted to heroin, I can tell you, everything that I've read says iboga is the way to go. Now, can you get off of heroin on psilocybin? Sure. I absolutely think that's possible. But my understanding is that you might have to sit through several ceremonies for that, where iboga is virtually a one and done. So let me send you to someplace else. And I think that's the other thing about having integrity, again, as a practitioner, is that I don't have to sell you on doing psilocybin. In fact, I shouldn't sell you on doing psilocybin. I should look at your situation and I should make a decision if I think this is right for you. Otherwise, I should send you to someone else. I should send you to somebody that does bufo correctly. I should send you to somebody that does iboga correctly. Or I should send you to, again, somebody, that does ayahuasca. And I think that, if somebody said to me, well, I've done psilocybin 4 or 5 times and I'm still hooked on whatever, XYZ, whatever it is, I need to say, okay, tell me about your experience. Tell me about what you experienced in that setting. And then, oh, by the way, here, I think that you need to go and do something else. The essence of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So that's how I think we categorize that then.
Well, and, you mentioned integrity, and I think it's super important. I want to acknowledge you for that by, just saying, I'm not selling people, referring people to what it is. And what you said earlier too, which is so important. And I think everybody needs to hear that, is you're not doing the healing. You're a conduit. You're there as a sitter, but you're not egotistically the healer. Right. And I think that's a big part of, choosing the right facilitator when you're starting to look into doing this work. And of course, doing the right medicine for what it is you may want to achieve. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, because I think it's really important that, people kind of, do their research, do their homework to find out what's going on, and not to just, because you hear about it, and I'm sure you've seen where people are just so desperate to do this treatment, they start lying about things, or when they did that last, or whatever it may be. If you watch the Dosed movie, did you see the original Dosed?
I didn't.
They followed a woman around Vancouver And she had her own addiction. It's a great documentary. I recommend everybody see it. They have a second one out now too. And it started, some filmmakers trying to help their friend, and because she had addiction issues, and they started with psilocybin. And they ended up getting to the ibogaine, working with Gabor Mate and a number of people. But it was interesting because how she had admitted that she lied about, because she wanted to do it so much that she wasn't being honest. And it's important to really have that transparency for the safety of these medicines as well, right?
Yeah. I think that psilocybin is gentler in regards to people that lie to you. I mean, I've worked in the medical community long enough to know that people lie all the time, and you're right, they're desperate. And so, but certain medicines like ayahuasca, if you lie about SSRIs, you can die. Same with iboga. Those are two, because they're MAOI inhibitors. You need to absolutely, and again, you can go to a different facility and lie. I, again, tell people, really, truly, I mean, I know how difficult it is to get off of SSRIs, because I've helped people do that. But the fallout from lying about that, again, can be devastating. Hang
Not
on for
to
just a
mention
second.
just a difficult experience, right?
There we go. We have a thunderstorm approaching, and so the whole inside of my building just went dark because I have overhead clouds.
Yeah, we've got some pretty crazy winds up where I am in the mountains right now, so it's a beautiful day, but very windy. So what else, if there is anything you wanted people to know specifically about your work, about soul retrieval, about working with these medicines, what would you tell them that we haven't already necessarily covered?
I don't know that there's anything that I haven't covered other than to tell you that, a lot of people are trying to reach ego death. I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing. I think that if that happens, it happens in its own time, that we don't force it. I think that the biggest thing that I can tell you is that psilocybin, not all psilocybin is the same. So if you picked mushrooms out of cow patties, I guarantee you that that's not the same as golden teachers. I really think that that's important for people to know. If you're doing this in a clinical setting, you're not going to get the same experience if you do it within ceremony. You're absolutely not going to get the same experience. Again, if you're not doing it, there's trip sitters, and I think that's great. I think we need those. But I also know that that's different than being trained in shamanism and what we do in regards to soul retrieval. There's a difference in regards to somebody holding your hand and helping you through an experience versus somebody that's actually able to help you integrate those missing soul pieces. And again, entheogens have been used for thousands of years. And it was used as a medicine to help people in regards to their spiritual and their physical and emotional experiences.
Well, and I think if we look through history, we could probably have a lengthy conversation about the possibility of ancient spiritual teachers and shamans using these medicines, even within, some of our own lineages of religion, let's say,
absolutely,
in terms of these sacraments. Now, one question that I do have, because you talked about shamanism there again, and, typically, and this is, how I grew up anyway, so I don't want to put it on everybody, but, we would have this perception that shamanism were medicine men and indigenous people, and now we're seeing this change where so many, let's, for lack of a better word, Caucasian folks are now, being shamans and working as shamans. How do you see, what's your experience in that as a Caucasian woman, as a shaman? Do you, because we hear it a lot from the work we did, and we've changed things since I started in 2018 with Spirit Plant Medicine to really include as much indigenous culture and teachings as possible. So how do you see that in your world and the practice that you're working with?
So first of all, I have to say that indigenous medicine and shamans that are indigenous that don't have any type of Western background or influence, I respect and honor all of that. My background, my people, Indo-European, definitely Celtic. None of us can claim any kind of Druidism because, again, that was, wiped off the face of the planet. But a lot of our people, and by the way, part of my lineage is also Sami. And so none of that made any sense to me because, again, shamanism is about direct revelation. It's about having your totem animal step forward and tell you and or guide you in a particular situation. Now, that doesn't necessarily make you a shaman to be able to have a totem animal and a guide and do all of that. But I'm considered a hollow bone in that I hold a toroidal field in regards to, again, allowing that healing energy to come through to people. Where did I get that knowledge? And how did I come about that? Well, it was kind of a slow drip, but none of it I asked for until I got into ayahuasca. And I didn't technically ask for it in ayahuasca. What happened is that I actually went to the place that I went to because I wanted to hear a speaker. It was a workshop. Ayahuasca wasn't even on my radar. I was absolutely driven to do it. The interesting thing is the night that my transformation happened, the night that I was called, there's usually 40 people that show up. And mind you, this wasn't in the United States. This was overseas. 40 people usually show up. And the night that, again, my transformation happened and I was called to do this work, nobody showed up for that group except for me.
Wow.
Now, I didn't even realize that that was an initiation until I got back home and I started working with a Lakota medicine woman who said, what did you see? How did you see it? What did you hear? What were you told? And only because she had done an entheogen years before and knew all of that was possible. And then said, okay, there's some things within your education in regards to how all of this works that I need to help you with. A remarkable woman. Again, it was transformational for me. Doing ayahuasca was transformational, but finding her to help me put the pieces together because when I did it, nobody explained to me what I could see. And so when I looked over at the shaman and he had skeletonized into something or other else, that was incredibly disturbing for me. When I looked over at him again and saw him as a black jaguar, really uncomfortable for me again, not understanding where I was being taken and what I was being shown. So my integration happened. It was a much rougher experience because there was nobody to call when I got home, like I said, except for this medicine woman that helped me along the way. So indigenous medicine and what we're called to do, I can only tell you that we all come from tribal people, whether we are Indo-European or we are a direct descendant from the Cherokee lineage. We are all of us. We know that now scientifically, that we all are direct descendants. And so some of us, though, have been terribly misplaced. I can tell you, if I'd had my choice, it would have been to be born in the United States. I would have been in a different culture. But I also know that the God of my understanding placed me where I am to be able to learn what I learned, to be able to do the work that I do today. And I honor that in all tribes, in all lineages, in all indigenous cultures, and again, with all my Native American friends.
Beautifully said. And, it's the oneness of all people.
Exactly.
Right? And, we're all indigenous to this planet, to agree that we are, that's for a topic for another show. But what we have to do is, I spoke with Belinda Aracho, and she called it like cultural appreciation. And, we have to acknowledge the history. It's not about agreeing with it. We weren't people who, the atrocities that come not just to the Native North American indigenous people, but people all over the world. And these atrocities. And, I think our work is to bring people together so that this doesn't happen again. And so that we can all see ourselves. We can't live in the past. We need to learn from it. Right. And so much that we didn't know. And the beauty of the internet and the technology we have is we have citizen journalists now. We're getting more truth. We're getting things that are coming up that, we didn't know 40, 50, 100, 200 years ago. And I think the work here is for us to bring that all together so that we are one. We are humanity. There's, it's like race. There's only one race. It's a human race. We have different cultures within our race and things of that nature, but we're just the race of the same people, and we go through the same things. We have the same needs, the same desires. When we really look at each person and you get that connection and realize that we're no different than the other person. We all go through the same challenges and problems. And if we can have a space to let go and explore without that ego getting in the way, life becomes a very, very different thing. And I think,
and if we can offer community, I mean, my people, Irish background, potato famine, brought up in absolute stark poverty. Can I then relate to, again, my other brothers and sisters that have gone through war and famine and all of that? I mean, it took thousands of years for my people for my ancestors to live, for me to get here, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, all of my ancestors, the women and the men that went through, the poverty and the famine and the pestilence and the flu, all of that. For my DNA and for me to actually step foot onto this planet. And it's the same for everybody else.
Yeah. And I like that you brought that up because, our ancestors are certainly part of who we are. There's no question. We carry their DNA, their trauma, their challenges, so many different things that we're not even so many people aren't consciously aware of. And as we do this work, we can clear that and clear a better path moving forward, so we're not bringing the same patterns that don't serve, right? And I think that's
I agree important. And I think psilocybin directly affects our DNA. And I've been led through some of my own experiences to go back and fix some of the stuff that my ancestors again went through. And have been shown that work too. And I tell people, the trauma and the lineage of whatever trauma it is, whether it's drugs or alcohol or sexual abuse or whatever the case may be, that can stop with you. You don't have to pass that down to the next generation.
Absolutely. And that's just all part of doing the work. Wow. Well, Debra, it's been a really great conversation. I'm sure we could probably talk for hours on all these, different multifaceted parts of the conversation, but I wanted to, I like to keep it about an hour. And I want to thank you for the work you do, for taking the time out of your day to be here. And I want to invite people, if you're curious, because you're in the Seattle area in US, you can look Debra up in the Meehl Foundation. Is it .org? I'm sorry, I don't have it.
It is .org.
Right. And you can also meet her in person at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference coming up in November this coming year. And she's definitely out there. If there's anything you want to add, Debra, please. It's a great opportunity to let people know how to get a hold of you and whatever else that might be if they're curious about learning more.
We also have a Facebook presence. It's facebook.com/Meehl Foundation. We have all of our retreats listed there under events. And so throughout the summer, it's about every other weekend, all summer long. We offer a 3-day retreat. If people mention that they saw this, we'll actually take $100 off a retreat for them.
Ooh, that's excellent. Thank you for that. So again, thank you so much. Keep doing the great work you're doing. If there's anything I can do to support what you're doing, let me know. We're happy to, let our community know, because I think it's important that people know where they can get good, solid support and practitioners in doing this work. So thank you for your integrity. Thank you for your experience and the heart opening you bring to many, many people. Thank you very much for that. And I encourage any of you, if you're looking to do some work, look up Debra at the Meehl Foundation.
Thanks so much, Marc, for
Great.
having me.
Thanks, Debra. Until next time, folks, we'll see you later. Take care.